A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends, welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And A Course in What is a free weekly podcast that comes out every Tuesday, and we are on episode number 36. So thank you for joining me today. We are on chapter 3, The Innocent Perception, on page 43, and the section is section 4, titled Air and the Ego. And today we will finish up with the last two paragraphs, paragraph 6 and 7 of this section. In these last two paragraphs, Jesus continues his discussion of perception and knowledge. And this is a continuation of the last couple of podcast episodes where we started talking about the difference between these two terms. Perception is part of the split mind, the dream of separation. And Kenneth Wapnick broke up this whole everything that's occurring into two different levels, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 being the level of non-dualism, the level of one whole mind joined with God, and that is synonymous with knowledge or heaven. And level 2 being the realm of separation or duality. And what sustains this dream of separation is guilt. The unconscious guilt in our mind, the guilt over having separated from God. And the ego tells us that we've really done it this time by separating from God, and he's going to punish us. So as a result, we all carry that unconscious guilt around, which is responsible for all of our loveless thinking. Anything that isn't love is really a product of the guilt and the fear in our mind. Guilt and fear are fairly synonymous terms. The unholy Trinity, as opposed to the Holy Trinity of the Holy Spirit, God, and the one Son, the unholy Trinity of the ego is sin, guilt, and fear. Sin is the mistaken belief in separation from God. It's a mistaken belief because it can't really happen. There is no such thing as separation from God. And guilt is the result of that sin. And fear always follows guilt. So what follows guilt is a fear of punishment. The ego keeps our focus stuck in the body and the world as a form of denial. We pretend that nothing's really going on, that we haven't separated from God. We kick all of that out of our mind and we pretend that doesn't exist so that we won't be punished. But obviously it doesn't work because we still retain that guilt. As the Course says, ideas do not leave their source. And really, when I say that we kick God out of our mind, it's just another way of saying we kick love out of our mind. We kick oneness out of our mind. And most of us, of course, aren't in touch with all of this that's going on with that guilt, but we are in touch with a feeling that something's not quite right, that maybe this world never really totally feels comfortable, no matter what we do or who we're with. It's not our home. The fact that we're not choosing love in every moment shows us that something other than love is occupying space in our mind. And the body just plays into this whole sense of denial because the body keeps our focus on the world. The body keeps us very busy in the world, just as the ego wants it. The ego wants us to stay busy in the world, seeking, as the Course says, the ego's motto is seek and do not find. And because healing is in our mind, it can't be found in the world. The ego has to keep our identification as a body in order for us to not heal. So in order to heal, then, we need to move from body identification to spirit identification. And that's why some people don't like it when we get all spiritual or start to heal or even go to therapy. They're threatened by that because it forces them to look at how they are not choosing healing in their own lives. And getting back to this idea of the body is the central figure in this dream world. Without a body, how would we even know that we were here? That's why we so desperately cling to our body, because we are desperately clinging to the ego. And why? Because we're afraid of knowing ourselves as a mind or a spirit, because then the ego dies. When we have that recognition, there is no ego. So the body is a tool of perception, of this dualism. There's a perceiver, you in your body, and a perceived, whatever's outside of you, other bodies, other things. And this can't exist in oneness. It can only exist in separation. So perhaps that'll help as we read this first sentence of paragraph 6. The ability to perceive made the body possible because you must perceive something and with something. The ability to perceive is our split mind, that thought of separation or tiny mad idea, as the Course calls it, that had consequences or effects. It produced a dream world. All thinking produces form on some level. That tiny mad idea had an experience of separation, which is this dream. When we had that thought of separation, that was our detour into fear or into our sleep state. And the body appeared in that dream. It made the body possible. Because again, it's a state of dualism. Now we're in this state of mind where there's a perceiver and a perceived. 2, that is why perception involves an exchange or translation, which knowledge does not need. Perception involves an exchange or translation because we now see things outside of ourselves. There's an exchange, whether it's actual physical exchange, whether it's an exchange in our mind of who that person is or that situation, whether it's an exchange of energy. There's an exchange or translation. We see things outside of ourselves. Knowledge or oneness doesn't know this exchange of you and me, mine, yours, the world, physical things. We translated oneness, so to speak, into two-ness. 3, the interpretative function of perception, a distorted form of creation, then permits you to interpret the body as yourself in an attempt to escape from the conflict you have induced. I think the interpretative function of perception means our free will. Though that free will is distorted, it's still a form of creation, meaning we still hold on to our creative ability to create, even though we're using that ability for messed up stuff. We use that free will to interpret the body as who we are. And why is that? Because it helps us escape the conflict in our mind. The ego tells us the body is who we are, so we make that decision to accept that, and we think that we've escaped that conflict. The conflict between who we truly are, which is spirit and innocent, and who the ego tells us we are, which is a body and guilty. 4, spirit, which knows, could not be reconciled with this loss of power because it is incapable of darkness. Spirit isn't a part of this messed up perception. Spirit is outside the dream of time and space and bodies. We can't reconcile oneness with two-ness. It just doesn't work. Either you are in oneness or you're in two-ness. You can vacillate between the two, but you can't perceive both at the same time. You can be in the world, but not of it, as Gandhi said. And it's important to keep in mind that this course isn't talking about behavior. It's not talking about what you do in the world. It's talking about how you perceive the world. It's talking about your thinking. It's not focused on the body because that would be two-ness. It's focused on your mind. And darkness, as it says, is just another word synonymous with the ego thought system. It doesn't literally mean dark. It's the opposite of the light of God in your mind, the darkness, which is the sin, guilt, and fear of the ego thought system. 5, this makes spirit almost inaccessible to the mind and entirely inaccessible to the body. This is a great sentence. The reason spirit is almost inaccessible to the mind is because we listen too intently to our ego. Our fear is so great that spirit can't even get through. We're so focused on the ego. But it says almost inaccessible because the mind will always retain that spark of God, no matter how deeply buried we become. It still can hear the voice of God deep down. And the reason it says it makes spirit entirely inaccessible to the body is because we can't reconcile spirit and body. We can't reconcile oneness and two-ness. What is physical is not eternal. 6. Therefore, spirit is perceived as a threat because light abolishes darkness merely by showing you it is not there. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that spirit is seen as threatening, and not just to others, as I mentioned, when we begin accessing it in our own lives, but also it's threatening to ourselves, to our own ego. Spirit is hugely threatening. That's why the ego might sabotage our own efforts at healing our mind. How many of us have skipped a day or a week or years of not doing a course lesson? And that's fine. That's not punishable or wrong. You can skip as much as you want, but you need to see that as your ego. That's just the fear of love or the fear of God in your own mind. And that's the conflict. If you turn on a light in a dark room, the darkness just disappears. The light doesn't fight or struggle with the darkness. Light abolishes darkness simply by shining its light. So for us, what this all means is asking for the light. The light isn't just going to turn on. We have to flip the switch. And how do we do that? By asking for help, by recognizing that it's kind of dark in here, that it could be better. As Helen and Bill said, there must be another way. There's another way of approaching this life. 7. Truth will always overcome error in this way. And that's how truth wins. It simply outshines the darkness. 8. This cannot be an active process of correction because, as I have already emphasized, knowledge does not do anything. Spirit just is. Isness is all there is. As the Course says, we say God is, and then we cease to speak. There isn't anything else. There's nothing else to say. And that's hugely threatening to our ego because the ego's like, wait, yes, there's a lot more. There's me. There's all this stuff. Look outside of you and see how much there is. There isn't just God is. And none of us like this idea that God is and that's it. No one likes the idea of their individuality disappearing. But if that becomes threatening to us, that means that we've gotten way ahead of ourselves. We don't need to worry about that idea right now. That's way, 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 way off. We're a long way from our individuality disappearing. And by the time we're at that point in our spiritual evolution, we will be at the point of understanding more clearly what that means to us. We can't really understand that right now. So by the Course saying this cannot be an active process of correction, that means that it's not an active process because really Spirit doesn't do anything. It's not working really hard right now to get us to understand anything. It just is. 9. It can be perceived as an attacker, but it cannot attack. So this is referring to Spirit can be perceived as an attacker. Of course, the ego is going to perceive Spirit as attacking it. But Jesus is saying, really, Spirit can't attack anything. How can there be attack in oneness? Our ego tells us that Spirit is a threat, that God is going to punish us for leaving, but that's all just a lie that we bought into, hook, line, and sinker. But it's not the truth. 10. What you perceive as its attack is your own vague recognition that knowledge can always be remembered, never having been destroyed. So we misinterpret everything. What we think is a threat is merely our call to remember. It's that spark in our mind that reminds us, no matter how far off we wander, that we are not where we think we are. It's like how someone in hypnosis can go really far or deep into trance that they think they're living the experience in their mind of their childhood or a past life or whatever, but they aren't totally there. They're in a chair in my office. There's a part of their mind that can't leave the fact that they're doing hypnosis with me. They still retain a vague recognition that they're having this experience while actually being somewhere else. Paragraph 7, sentence 1. God and his creations remain in surety and therefore know that no miscreation exists. Again, that's that idea of God is. God only knows oneness. The only thing we can know is that oneness. That's the only thing that's true. We can't know anything really for sure in a dream on this level of misperception. And when it says, and therefore know that no miscreation exists, that's sort of what we were just talking about with that example of hypnosis, that we're pretending to know this dream world, but it's not our home. Somewhere in our mind, we know that no miscreation can exist. And that's what brings about the conflict in our mind, is believing that this miscreation does exist. 2, truth cannot deal with errors that you want. When I read this sentence, I sort of read it as sort of that slang, like truth can't deal with it. Truth cannot deal with errors that you want. Truth can't be accessed in your mind as long as you want or choose separation, as long as you're listening to the ego. 3, I was a man who remembered spirit and its knowledge. So here, once again, is one of the few places in A Course in Miracles that Jesus speaks in first person. And what's interesting to me in this sentence is that when he says a man who remembered spirit, to me, that's implying forgetting. You can only remember once you've forgotten. So perhaps that's what he's saying, that Jesus forgot too, just like us. And then he remembered. That seems to be what it's saying. I don't know. What do you think about that sentence? Do you think that he means that he forgot and then he remembered? Or do you think it means he always remembered and never forgot? I tend to think it's the first because he goes on to lead me to believe that his mind too needed correcting. And even if it didn't, I think he's telling us it did because we need someone that's relatable, right? 4, as a man, I did not attempt to counteract error with knowledge, but to correct error from the bottom up. So I see this as his way of saying we can't skip steps. You can't jump from your current level of perception to a healed mind. You can't jump from dualism to non-dualism. Only the revelation that we've talked about at the very beginning of this podcast provides glimpses of that jump. But that, we are told, comes from God to us. We can't create that jump. Jesus is saying he had to correct his own error in his mind from the bottom up, from where he believed he was. And the bottom, of course, is the bottom. It's stuck in an ego thought system. This thought system that told him that he was in the world and stuck in a body. He had to have all of those misperceptions healed, just as we're doing with A Course in Miracles. Just as the lessons of A Course in Miracles guides us to do. He had his experiences reinterpreted. 5, I demonstrated both the powerlessness of the body and the power of the mind. And I think he's referring to the crucifixion here when he says the powerlessness of the body and the power of the mind. The powerlessness of the body, meaning he didn't buy into that as his identity. He had shifted from body identification to spirit identification. The power was in his mind, his power to choose, to remember the truth that he was at one with God. 6, By uniting my will with that of my Creator, I naturally remembered spirit and its real purpose. Okay, I think I just talked about that. And when it says, remembered its real purpose, I think he's talking about the real purpose of the mind, which is to extend love, not to miscreate. 7, I cannot unite your will with God's for you, but I can erase all misperceptions from your mind if you will bring it under my guidance. And he can't just come in and heal our mind. It's not like he's an evangelical healer and he places his hand on our head and we're healed of a belief in separation from God. He can't do the work for us in our mind that's necessary to heal that belief in dualism. But if we are willing to have our minds healed, we can surrender our perceptions to him. And he then helps us by, as he says, guiding us to see things differently. And that's why it's important that if you do pray, that your prayer really is to always have your mind healed of the belief in separation that's causing whatever the physical problem is. Not to have the physical problem cured or healed or resolved or whatever, but rather to have your mind healed of the belief in separation that then made the problem. 8, only your misperceptions stand in your way. So there again, he's not saying only your finances stand in your way, only Joe stands in your way. He's saying only your misperceptions are standing in your way. That's why you have to have your mind healed, your misperceptions healed, not the physical world healed. Once you have your mind healed, then you will be guided in what to do in the physical world. And maybe that is doing something physical with Joe, confronting him or leaving that relationship, or I don't know. But really, it all comes back to asking to have your mind healed of the belief in separation. Because the truth is, without having your mind healed of that belief, you're going to be guided by your ego, and your ego doesn't know what the right outcome is in your job or in your relationship with Joe. So there is one within you, the Holy Spirit, that does know the right outcome. So that's why he's saying, bring your mind under my guidance. 9, without them, your choice is certain. All that stands in the way of the healing are misperceptions. It's our focus on the illusion, on fear, sin, guilt that stand in our way. And without all of those other choices of our job and Joe and whatever's going on, there's really only one choice. Without them, without those misperceptions, your choice is certain. 10, sane perception induces sane choosing. So you may recall in one of the last podcast episodes, I was saying that this idea of perception is like the lowest rung, and then there's higher levels within dualism. There's true perception, right-mindedness, accurate perception. Here he's saying another term, sane perception. So we're still in the illusion. We're still in this dream world, but we're having our mind cleansed. We're perceiving the world differently. We slowly have our mind healed from wrong-mindedness to right-mindedness. Again, we don't jump to one-mindedness. We work from the bottom up. We begin making saner choices in perception. 11, I cannot choose for you, but I can help you make your own right choice. And the end of this sentence could read, if you are willing. I can help you make your own right choice if you are willing. It's our little willingness that heals our mind. I can't say that enough. If there's no willingness to see outside of the ego, to believe that you could be wrong about something, then you'll forever be stuck in misperception. It all begins with having a little willingness. 12, many are called, but few are chosen. Should be, all are called, but few choose to listen. And this is a reference to the Bible where the Jesus of the Bible, and I say that because he's definitely not the Jesus of A Course in Miracles, meaning the interpretation is not the same. Maybe he's not even the same person, who knows? But supposedly he told a parable of a king who was throwing a feast for his son for his wedding day, and he sent some slaves out to gather the people and come to this dinner. And a lot of them refused. I guess they had better things to do. So the king became outraged. And then when one man showed up to the dinner, but he wasn't wearing the proper wedding clothes, they tied his hands and his feet, and he was thrown out and banished into the darkness to be punished. So he was banished from the kingdom and into the darkness. Such a sweet story, isn't it? It goes on to say that many are called, but few choose to listen. And that's the lesson of this parable. But here, Jesus is correcting the saying and says that all are called, but few choose to listen. All are called into the kingdom of heaven, but few are listening. We all have that voice in the back of our head. Again, the ego is speaking first and loudest, but there's a call behind that, a call to awaken, a call to choose love, a call to just do better in our daily lives. But few people are listening to that. 13, therefore, they do not choose right. Okay, so let's read number 12 again. Many are called, but few are chosen. Should be all are called, but few choose to listen. Therefore, they do not choose right. So they're not listening to that voice of the Holy Spirit. So of course they're not going to choose right. They're going to choose the ego thought system. The only way we can't hear that voice for God is because we are choosing to not hear it. 14. The chosen ones are merely those who chose right sooner. I think this is important. And the important word here for me is sooner. We will all choose right eventually. As the introduction to A Course in Miracles states, this is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. And again, it doesn't mean the course is required, but the content of what the course teaches is required by everyone, everywhere, no matter what form you take it in. We all must awaken. A dream can't go on forever. So the chosen ones are choosing right sooner. It's not a matter of if you will choose, if you will awaken, but rather when. 15. Right minds can do this now, and they will find rest unto their souls. So right minds being minds under the guidance of Jesus or the Holy Spirit will find rest, meaning they'll find peace. The conflict will disappear in our minds when we make that right choice. Because all conflict comes from believing that you even have a choice, that there's even something to choose between, that there's a perceiver and a perceived. 16, God knows you only in peace, and this is your reality. That can't be drilled into our heads enough, that this is our reality. Peace is our reality. Only love is real. Only truth is real. God is certain. There's no conflict in God's mind. Therefore, there is no conflict in ours when we choose correctly. And only then will we know ourselves as God knows us. And we will know God. When we stop fighting that truth, when we stop fighting our reality and trying to make the impossible possible. Okay, so let's stop there. We'll begin the next section, Beyond Perception, in the next podcast episode. So thank you again for joining me today and reading the course along with me. And if you want to stay in touch, we have a Facebook page for this podcast. It's at facebook.com/A Course in What if you're on Facebook. I also have a hypnotherapy page where I post things, and that's at /Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy. You can also find me on my website, cynthiamorgan.us. And if you want to email, you can email through my website or at acourseinwhat@gmail.com. Once again, I always love hearing from you. If you have any questions or comments that you want me to share, I would love to do that too. All right, so if you want to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.